Everybody. So this is our second of our 6 points discussions, and last time, and Jeff is throwing things across me. Last time we were here doing this, we talked about the first point of our 6 points of Sanshin practice style. I hope folks have been to the website and seen some information about that. This is part of our overall theme this year. We're looking at lineage and legacies. So what have we inherited in terms of very specific, thank you, practice points, practice styles from our immediate 3 ancestors? So we have Sawaki Roshi, we have Uchiyama Roshi, and we have Okumura Roshi, who founded this place, Sanshin. So it has felt important to take a little bit of time as a Sangha and talk about what exactly have we particularly inherited from these 3 that makes up the particular voice that we have at Sanshin. So Sanshin's style, Sanshin's voice is not better or worse than anyone else's, but it's a very particular flavor. And it seems important that we recognize that and that it not be lost. So it feels important to sort of drill down a bit and spend some time talking together about what exactly these 6 points are, what they mean for us. So if we look at these things as a group, they have some commonalities, they make sense together, but we need to take the time to look at each one by itself. So I don't know if it matters that I can't see myself on this screen. I'm going to assume everyone can still see and hear me. All right. So today we take up the second of our practice points, and that is about keeping forms simple so that we know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So when people arrive at Sanshin, they may be expecting, if this is their first time in a Zen center or in a Dharma practice place, maybe expecting to see a lot of quote unquote monks or people in exotic clothing or people with no hair or Asian people or something, running around doing a lot of esoteric stuff that feels exotic and interesting and exciting. And folks are disappointed when they come here because simple room, simple people, right? Maybe folks have seen pictures of big ceremonies. Maybe folks have been to other Buddhist temples, either in North America, somewhere in Asia, that have golden Buddhas and lots of fancy, altars and lots of things and lots of incense smoke and foreign languages. And they come here and say, well, but this is a simple room. And the people here are doing kind of simple things. This feels pretty plain. So when we arrive to practice, it may feel kind of weird in the beginning that we're putting our hands together and bowing to each other. This is not something we typically do in the West, or that we're always turning to the right, or that we fluff up our cushions a certain way, or that if we're in maybe a retreat situation, we're eating with a set of bowls and we're eating in certain ways, and that all might feel, a little bit exotic and a little bit strange. But we learn these things pretty quickly. And if we watch ourselves, it's really interesting to note how quickly these things become just sort of part of our being. We go into this, we're headed for the Zendo, and it's not very long before we're not thinking twice about stepping in with the correct foot and hands in gasho and bowing to the room, and we don't think twice about that until a new person comes up to us and says, what is that thing you just did? And we go, oh, yeah, that's right. There's a way we do things, and there's a form for doing things. But, we learn that pretty quickly, and it just becomes part of our being. It doesn't feel weird anymore. It just feels like this is what we do as a community. So it doesn't feel exotic. It very quickly stops feeling like something which is entertaining, something we get to play with, right? So when people arrive, they usually, they see how simple things are here. In my experience, they have one of 2 reactions. Half of them or some part of them say, I'm relieved that I don't have to learn a lot of scary Japanese stuff in order to be here. That doesn't feel relevant to me, that takes time away from Zazen, because, it's all about the Zazen. And, that's my spiritual technology, and I'm here to learn Zazen to make myself into a person I like better. So all of this exotic ceremonial, liturgical, ritual stuff feels like, well, that's just extra. It's just stuff I have to learn that doesn't mean anything to me, and I'm relieved that I don't have to be scared about making a mistake because y'all don't do a lot of that stuff. That's half the people. And the other half of the people say, well, I'm feeling disappointed that I don't get to immerse myself in all of this exotic, picturesque, entertaining, exciting, the ceremonial, and I don't get to feel special. If we have all of these exotic things, then we feel special. And we also feel like, well, this must be the real thing. Practice here must be the real thing. This must be legitimate. They're not making it up. They've inherited this from Japan, therefore, it's legitimate, therefore it's authentic. So we have all these kind of mixed feelings. Maybe we felt both of those things when we write. We have all these kind of mixed feelings about form and ritual and ceremony in our practice and the role of that, right? So it's true that our practice here includes a relatively small number of the forms and the things, the formalities that you might see in other places that practice Soto Zen. This is not because we're in North America and we don't know how to do things. It's not that we've forgotten or that we never knew, right? How to do all of these things. Toto-san and I both train, we did the full 9 yards. We're fully credentialed. We trained in the training temples. If we want to do a ritual here or we need to do something in order to take care of the Sangha, we know where to look for that. It's not because we don't know how to do stuff. It's also not because we don't think forms are important. It's not because, forms are secondary, that stuff's not important, that's just sort of icing on the cake. That's not it either. People may think we're not allowed to do complex ceremonies here, possibly because we think Toto-san doesn't like them, and that's not what's going on. That's not at all the case. In fact, Toto-san does more ritual form ceremony here than they do at Antaiji. The reason for that is we actually have a lay Sangha, and Antaiji doesn't. We'll talk more about that in a minute, right? But he's doing more ceremony here, more ritual and form here than he did when he was actually at Antaiji with his teacher. So the issue for us is why we are doing these things. At Sanshin, when we're going to add something or do something, we always ask ourselves, why are we doing this? Is it meaningful to this time and place with these people? So for instance, we had a new bell which was donated. We don't need to tell the long story about that, but I wanted to do sort of an initiation for this bell, because you typically would initiate something like that. Bell plays an important part of being in the Zendo. We use it every day, sometimes multiple times a day. So I thought it's important that we recognize that that's going on. We did something which was a modification of a ceremony you would do in Japan for one of those huge, big outside bell tower bells, right? We know where to look for that. That's not a ceremony we do here all the time, but it was something I felt we needed for the Sangha, and we knew how to do it. And so it was not a question of we're not allowed, or we don't like ceremony, we're just going to chuck that bell up there on the ceiling and that's enough, right? So it's all about the attitude we take with those things. So we do a few forms here. We do them simply, and we take the time to understand what are we doing and why are we doing it. And we keep the connection between the forms and the mind of Shikantaza. So in other words, our outward forms are a manifestation of what's going on inside. It's not just a performance. And that's something which is important for us. So it's important to me when I'm training someone here to do a form, to do a service position, whether that's someone who's brand new and maybe it's just the forms of Zazen, or maybe it's somebody who's a Shuso and is learning to be a Doshi. It's important to me to provide context. Where does this thing come from? And why are we doing it? And how is it related to the rest of our practice? It's particularly important, I think, in North America, where we're not practicing. We're often making our own new practice places. We're often creating our own new practice communities. We're not sort of falling into a place in Japan that's been practicing in the same way, in the same place for 800 years. Where we just step into that container, we sort of get it by osmosis because it's been going on there, for centuries. This is kind of frontier practice in a certain kind of way. So it feels like context is particularly important for us, where we're not, sometimes we're not using the standard regulation implements, spaces, right? The story gets lost. So to know why is important. And in many cases, in my experience, we don't know what we don't know. So we lose something and then we don't know we've lost it. Right? So the context for these things is important, even if we're not fully doing everything we would do, in a much more formal circumstance. To know what the context is feels useful as a part of our practice. So the mental place we are with this, right? The attitude we take with this is, we really want to do whatever forms we're doing. We want to do them very thoroughly and do them very sincerely, without a separation. This is going to sound familiar now, into an I that's doing a thing, right? There's no I that's doing a ceremony. There's no I that's making gassho. There's no I that's bowing, right? There's no I that's being a doshi. There is simply this activity which is going on, which is not about a human being performing a ritual. As soon as we've got separation, now ego is stepping into that space, right? All kinds of things can happen. So we're not using this thing to build self, build our egos, compare ourselves to others. I bow better than you. You know, I did that doshi round better than you. I know the words for these things, therefore I'm somebody, right? It's so easy to sort of inject our ego in there. So we simply do these things wholeheartedly. We do them sincerely. And when we're doing them with that attitude, it's an expression of our gratitude. It's an expression of our respect. It is the complete functioning of practice realization, and therefore Buddha is here, right? We're always hearing this teaching about Buddha is alive because practice is happening. It's very much about that. It's not about I'm performing a service position in the ceremony in order to something, right? There is some interesting kind of working together, practicing together that happens around that, which is not about the ego. It's not about separation. So, of course, there is a tie here to the largest theme overall for Sanshin's practice, which is what? Non-duality. Non-reliance. Yeah, non-duality, but non-reliance is our sort of key word here. So our larger Soto Zen tradition includes a number of elaborate, very decorative ceremonies with lots of artifacts and lots of instruments and lots of things. And if you've ever seen them, they're quite something, right? In those times and places, those things are completely appropriate. There are times where we really need to do that. In fact, a few of us are off to Iowa this weekend to do a very, what is for us a pretty large funeral ceremony with all the bells and whistles and the cymbals and the drums and the incense and the torches and the whole thing. You would never see that here. In that time and place for that particular community, that's appropriate. So there are times we need to do that. Our particular aspiration here at Sanshin is that we keep the intention and we keep the meaning and the spirit of our very simple forms without letting them become kind of empty gestures. We do it because it's that time of year, or we do it because somebody else did it, or I fall prey to this. I do something because I did it in the training temple in Japan. Well, really? Am I supposed to do that here now too? Maybe, maybe not, right? So just because custom says we do it, just because the calendar says we do it, just because somebody else does it, is not why we do forms here. Maybe all of those things are true of whatever we're doing, but just to simply do it because, oh, it's kind of rote is not our approach to that here. We don't do it just because now it's time to something, right? You may know Soto Zen has quite an elaborate liturgical calendar. If you look at all the things in the training temple that happen on a weekly, monthly, annual, quarterly, I mean, it's a book, right? We could be doing all those things here. We could, it just might not be so meaningful. This is a different circumstance. But I think it's useful to know for context, there is a big, complicated annual liturgical calendar. We could be doing a lot of ritual, and we do in the Senmon Soto. So rather than just being performances, rather than just being events on a calendar, these things should really come from the mind of Zazen. They should come from the mind of Shikantaza, from respect and gratitude and seeing the larger picture of our practice and understanding why we're doing those forms. So, my Dharma brother Shoryu pointed out once to me, and I thought was really helpful. He says, well, the echoes that we do at the end of the liturgy in the morning are really, that's us sort of dedicating our zazen to all beings. I went, oh, that's an interesting connection. I hadn't thought about it that way, right? We've just sat 2 periods of zazen. We get up and do some liturgy. Isn't it useful and helpful to think about that liturgy as being, now I'm dedicating my practice, I'm dedicating my zazen to all beings. Now we have a really nice connection, right, between forms and the mind of zazen. So I thought that was helpful coming from him. So Sanshin inherits our very simple style from Antaiji, which is of course where our founder, Todo-san, practiced with his teacher Uchiyama Roshi. One of the interesting, unique aspects of Antaiji is that they conduct almost no ceremonies. They do almost no liturgy ritual, other than some kind of special circumstances when they have visitors. There's no daily liturgy, there's no daily services, there's no chanting when they use oryoki. They don't do any of those things. Todo-san is fond of telling the stories. As when Antaiji monks go somewhere else, they had a bad reputation because they couldn't even do the Heart Sutra without looking at a sutra book. I mean, it's like the first thing you learn, right? Everybody knows the Heart Sutra. So they couldn't even do that without looking at a sutra book because they never do those things at Antaiji. So really that's in large part because Antaiji was established in its current form in 1921 as a place for Komazawa University students, graduates, who wanted to study Dogen's teachings to have a place to go, to come together and practice and study Dogen's teachings. So it was never really about training clergy to go out go back to their home temples and do those things, right? It was a study place for people who'd been through Komazawa, had the background, and now really wanted to get down to a concentration on Dogen. So on that basis, Antaiji doesn't have a group of lay supporters. It doesn't have a danka, right? It doesn't have sort of a lay sangha, if you will, that provides financial support and then in turn expects a certain amount of ceremony and ritual, like funerals, right? There's no sort of liturgical stuff that goes with deceased relatives and good harvests and groundbreakings and blessing new buildings and new businesses and all the things that clergy might go out to do. So what Antaiji says on its website is that it's a place where Zen is practiced without any additions or modifications. Antaiji has no parishioners, and there are a minimum of Buddhist services. So we see the link between these two things, which is really interesting, right? All that liturgy, in a place like Antaiji, all that liturgy would be tied to, are there lay people who expect that from us or not, right? So if that's not your audience, then things shift a little bit. So Uchiyama Roshi even let go of the basic daily morning service in order that the entire focus could remain on Zazen and Dogen, right? So even let go of the most basic service. You may know there's 2 or 3 or 4 forms of the morning service. The largest one goes for an hour, and the one we do here goes for about 20 minutes. So there's, versions of this thing. He even let go of the short one. He said, we're simply going to do Zazen and concentrate on Dogen study. But interestingly, Uchiyama Roshi knows how we are as human beings. And he warns us, we can even if we're only doing really simple stuff and we're only doing Zazen and the forms that go with Zazen, we can still get hung up on those forms, right? We can still turn that into a chance to build ego or something we can attach to, right? We can get caught up, even the forms for Zazen. He says, when some people practice Zazen, they consider rituals such as turning clockwise or counterclockwise essential. They make Zazen a kind of ceremony. Ceremonies can be empty forms that have no real content. They simply become authority. Zazen shouldn't be such a ceremony, but we should live by Zazen, right? So on the one hand, yes, keeping things simple is important. And on the other hand, if we don't have the right attitude with that, even keeping things simple, we're still going to go down the rabbit hole, right? We're still going to get ourselves into trouble, even with those simple forms. So in addition to forms, we see this kind of simple attitude. I think in other areas of our practice life here, you're not going to see the most elaborate forms of robes here. We don't even mostly do the commercial robes here. We do Nyohoe, and that's a whole other topic. Please go out to our website and look at the Sawaki Nyohoe treasury. You will not be sort of in a fixed position here of Sangha hierarchy. We all practice together. If we're doing a service, we don't necessarily put the most experienced people to the front. You've seen this room. It's a very simple room. Our building is very simple. There's no sort of elaborate Asian stuff here. There's no fancy brocade hangings, right? So all of those elements are really important in some circumstances, but on a day-to-day basis here at Sanshin, we put those aside in favor of something else. So in that, we follow Uchiyama Roshi's advice. The Zazen practiced among the followers of Bodhidharma and Dogen Zenji has nothing to do with whether we have magnificent building or not. What's really important is to foster real practitioners. We'll come back to that in a minute. To do that, we have to teach bit by bit. The followers of Bodhidharma must persist in this way no matter where they go. So even if we go to North America, right? We have to follow this way. So within Sanshin-style, real practitioners are those who are practicing with non-reliance, right? Those who are relying only on the arousing of Bodhi mind and only on our own awakening, rather than the experience of some kind of special circumstances or exotic rituals or liturgy or something like that. So, here we are again, non-reliance. But I think we have to be careful about potentially the other side of this point. I think there's a pitfall here that we need not fall into. It is really important that we not just sort of reject all forms and say that's irrelevant. And I've seen that happen in North America. Well, we're not going to do any of that stuff because it's Japanese and it's not relevant for me as an American in the 21st century. We have to be really careful about that. I think sometimes we want to use that as a dodge to get around our own discomfort, right? With ritual or form or formality or maybe we come from another tradition which had a lot of rituals and forms and we're really not comfortable with that, right? We have to look very carefully and be honest with ourselves and say, am I, sort of pushing that away because of my own discomfort with it? Or, my teacher says we don't need to do that stuff, so therefore somehow forms are bad, or forms are not worthwhile, or forms have no meaning. Particularly in North America where we don't have the context, I think it's easy to use that as a defense mechanism, right? As a justification for rejecting the more traditional elements of our practice. So yes, we get to choose. Yes, as a Sangha, we need to make decisions, but I think we have to be really honest with ourselves about how that decision-making process is happening. So, we do forms here when they're important. We do forms here when they're meaningful. As I mentioned, when we need to do a new ceremony here to support the practice of our Sangha, we do that. We do it wholeheartedly, and we do as much of that as we need to do. Or sometimes some of us need to participate in big Soto Shu ceremonies or help make those things possible. Some of us have to take service positions, and when we have to do that, we do it. And it means, we make the effort to understand what are we doing and why are we doing it. This might not be what we do at Sanshin, but I can't go in there and say, well, we don't do that at Sanshin, so I'm not going to do that part, right? We have to fold in with what's going on. So, I was recently the Ino at a big set of ceremonies at Zenshuji over a significant period of time. We were doing some big anniversaries. Many of my peers thought it was really ironic that I had been appointed the Ino because of where I come from. My peers were saying, oh, isn't that something? Because, where you come from, you don't do ritual because you don't like it. You don't like all those forms. And I thought, even my peers don't understand Sanshin-style. I had to educate that. No, it's not because my teacher doesn't like forms. We have a very particular approach to the way we do forms here. And when it's time to do a major ceremony, I put on the regulation stuff and I do what Sokan asked me to do, and that is the way I practice in that moment. It doesn't matter that at Sanshin we do something else. That is not the time for me to say my way is better than yours, and I'm only going to do it my way. It's time for me to fold in. So what do we do about caring for a householder Sangha, which we have here, when we inherit our style from a place like Antaiji that doesn't have a householder Sangha and therefore isn't set up to sort of meet those kinds of needs? Does that mean we shouldn't have lay people here or that we shouldn't meet those needs? So unlike Antaiji, of course, we do have a householding Sangha here, even though Todo-san's original vision didn't really make provision for that. It was not what he started out intending. He wasn't necessarily focusing on that, but when Sanshin started here, it inherited a certain number of local practitioners because there was a sitting group in town at the time. That group coincidentally sort of disbanded shortly after Sanshin started, so Sanshin inherited a Sangha. Here was a Sangha that Todo-san he didn't go looking for that. It wasn't part of his plan. But suddenly here we have people really who want to practice. So of course, this is a group that's going to look to Sanshin for spiritual guidance and for all of those rites of passage that you go to your local church or your local Sangha or your religious community for, right? Somebody has to do the weddings and the funerals and the baby namings. Somebody has to give precepts, right? All of those things need to happen. The significant days in the liturgical calendar, Buddha's birthday, Parinirvana Day, what are we going to do about Rohatsu? So suddenly we have all of these needs. So we have a Sangha that's looking to us not for the same things that a Japanese Danka would be looking to its temple for, but still, right? Things that happen in the year, and in return, then our Sangha is prepared to offer volunteer help, financial support, a welcoming presence to visitors, fellowship with each other, right? So there is some mutuality that happens there around some of these rituals and forms. So all of that means that Sanshin-style has to include forms, rituals, ceremonies, right? All of those things. Because we have practitioners, Sangha members, who will come to the temple for something besides Zazen. Yes, they're here for Zazen, but they're also looking for all of those kinds of support that you get from your religious community. So Shikantaza certainly is at the center of what we're doing here, but the style has to include support for householders who are carrying out their practice with their families and in their business place and with their jobs and with the rest of their life. So here we have to include introductory classes that say, here's how we do forms. here's how we bow, here's how we start zazen. We have to do those, simple rites of passage. I just did a wedding a couple of weeks ago. I'm doing another one in the fall. I mean, we have to take care of these things because we have a sangha. So how do we weave that all into this sort of practice point? We can't look to Antaiji as our model in this community because they don't do any of that stuff, right? So what do we do? Instead, what I've started to do is look back one more generation, because Sawaki Roshi and his style of forms and ceremonies is still around if we know where to look for it. It is not what they were doing at Antaiji. So Sawaki Roshi has some direct Dharma ancestors. My brother Isan was practicing with one of them. Hondo Roshi recently died, but now Isan has in his body all of those forms and deportment and how they did things, and he's now my resource. So when I have to reach back around on Taiji, I go to Isan and say, what did Hondo Roshi do? What did he learn from Sawaki Roshi, right? So that we stay within this family. We have sort of an anchor to look back to, a source to look back to, which is within our family, so it's appropriate for us, and we can take care of our Sangha in the way that we need to take care of our Sangha. So our forms are still rooted in Zazen. We can trace that lineage back, and again, it's not that our Dharma family is better than somebody else's, but if I'm looking for something, I'm going to start by looking at the resources that are closest to home, right? It's like when if I'm trying to think about how do we do something, or I'm going to add something, or something I've never seen, why am I going to start looking all over? I'm going to start with the core, and then perhaps work my way up. So ritual, form, customs, ceremonies. Important for giving the Sangha, I think, a sense of shared identity as a community. So there is this sort of religious meaning of those things, but anybody who studied some sociology can tell you, just embodying those things together, enacting those things together is important for building Sangha. It's important for giving us a shared sense of our history and what our tradition is. We're enacting something in this moment that includes our ancestors and includes the stories, because that's what we're carrying, in our body. So it's important that we not just say, oh, those forms, oh, those ceremonies, not relevant. We can change things, and sometimes we need to change things, but I'm always asking myself, if I'm going to change that form or change that ceremony, like that ceremony arose to meet some kind of practitioner need. So what's the need that it's meeting? If I do something different, that's fine, but I can't throw out the fact that it's there to meet a need. So what's the need? And then how do we meet the need, right, in this place and in this time? So Todo-san has always said, we need to be creative, we need to be flexible. It's North America in the 21st century. We need to manage our practice in some way that's sustainable, right? So this, I think, is a really interesting intersection. There's a lot of discussion and stuff we can chew on here, right? Because we've got, how do we sort of fully, faithfully carry out this tradition without losing the spirit, without losing the Zazen mind, the root of it being Shikantaza and all the things that go with that, and still, how do we not lose the non-reliance and yet still offer something which is effective, meaningful practice for this Sangha, in this place, in this day and age? Those are questions that I think all of our last three ancestors in different ways have been wrestling with, and we still have them. So I think one of the things we've inherited from them as part of this conversation is that intersection, right? Because they were all, you watch them all kind of wrestling with it in their own way. Like, Kodo Sawaki, we call him Homeless Kodo, because he never settled down and had a temple where he was sort of teaching that kind of ritual. And we have Uchiyama Roshi, who wasn't even doing a morning service. And then we've got Todo-san, who's coming to a whole new country and a whole new culture and saying, like, how do we do this form thing, right? So I don't think we're done with that conversation. I think we've inherited that conversation from them, as well as the teachings about that.